name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Kindly be seated. My dear friends in Jesus Christ, and my dear lovely congregation, and of course the viewers outside. This is indeed yet another privilege for all of us to come closer to God under His wings and under His presence, as we ought to take up the faith and the journey of faith, of human religious realms. And we thank God for all of this, as God has given to us this wonderful journey. And during this course of journey, we are reminded with certain topics, certain themes, and we are at certain spiritual or divine derivations time and again. For that matter, every Sunday we have the divine derivations. I dare not say conclusions, but divine derivations. The derivations are nothing but the way of life, how the faithful has to move on. And to this we have many concepts and many kinds of practicalities. To be precise and to elaborate, it is nothing but how to go about. How to go about. How to go about according to themes, according to concepts, and according to praxis. So this has been the order of the day of the faithful community across the globe, and we stand at crossroads, finding ourselves on a good path. Of course, there are times that we are in a fix, but certainly there is something vast and wide road, a path that is inviting us for us to travel peacefully. So friends, with this introduction in the context of a larger context, so this Sunday also, as we stand at many of the one derivations that are to come, we have one special theme this morning, Sunday also. So at the end of the day, or at the end of our meditation, we ought to see the derivations of the three texts that are offered unto us, and the strong decisions that we ought to make at the end of the day. So dear friends, so the theme comes as it is posted and as it is offered unto us. So before that, the Sunday is named as the Sunday for the mentally, physically challenged and palliative patients. I repeat, Sunday for the mentally and physically challenged and palliative patients. And this is the name of the Sunday, not the theme. And the theme is differently abled sanctity sanctity of life. I repeat, differently abled, sanctity of life. So we are often encountered with the word physically handicapped, and we are also encountered with the word physically disabled. So when we heard this kind of wording or vocabulary, we are really tongue-tied and we are really sorry for that. For that matter, we dare speak, or we seldom speak of that concept or praxis, whatever. So, because of this tongue-tiedness, a different word has been coined and allotted for us, that is physically challenged. So hereafter we ought to say or utter the word physically challenged instead of disabled or handicapped. So we are physically challenged or mentally challenged. So we have many hostels for the disabled or for the handicapped. And these hostels or residences have their own style of doing things. But here comes today a different aspect, a different cone, a different angle, and that is the differently ableness of those that are challenged, physically or mentally. The differentness. The other aspect or the other talent, other than this challengedness, there is another talent that has to be recognized. And to be elaborate again or precisely, it is nothing but there are physically challenged. At the same time, these physically challenged people all around have a different ability that is to be grabbed, that is to be attracted by us. Not that disappointing because of their challengedness, but because of that challengedness, we ought to encounter or attract the other talent or other ability that is sustained in them, for that matter, in a more vigorous way. That ability has been coming up. And the other phrase in the theme is sanctity of life. What is this sanctity? How this sanctity is associated with this disability or this challenges? Because sanctity is always divine. Sanctity is always holy. Sanctity belongs to God. When you segregate somebody because of this physically challengingness, that we call as a segregation, but God calls it as a sanctity. That segregation is now equivalent to sanctity. They are segregated because they are of sanctity. So the differently abled now are in sanctity. Now we need to look into that sanctity as it is a differently abled concept embedded in it. So that's how the theme is composed. as I read it and as I think of. So my dear brothers and sisters, so the first lesson comes to us in the same fashion as my first point also reads as integration of abilities and disabilities. So before going any further, let me explain the text as well as the context along with the lesson. So Moses was a public figure in the Old Testament who was chosen by God, who was loved by God, who was attracted by God, and vice versa. Both attracted each other. And Moses was selected by God even as an agent, as a leader to liberate the people of Israel from the bondage from the Egyptians. And to this cause, he had elected the personality in Moses. And Moses, in the encounter with God, he was reluctant. At the burning bush, while speaking to God, he was reluctant to take up that wonderful task. And God was really angry at him. And he said, "Why do you reject this offer? Don't you think there are others who can take up this task? Why do you think that I have chosen you? It's not because of your talent, but because I chose you, that's all. It's by chance we are often leaders. It's by chance because of chance we are what we are." And that's Moses and his life. God chose him, and that is God's choice, that's it. But Moses' conviction, Moses' sincerity, and Moses' deliberation was that he was not eloquent speaker, which means in our present context and thematic context, he was not an enabled man. He was a physically challenged man, not being eloquent in his speech. And he also explains his weakness, saying, "I am slow of speech." And he also says further, "I am slow of tongue." So my speech is weak, my eloquence is weak, and my tongue also is weak. So Lord, why do you select me to this task? And you know what God says? God says in verse 11, "Then the Lord said to him, Who gives speech to mortals? Who makes them mute? Who makes them deaf? Who sees, or who makes them see? Who makes them blind? Is it not I?" So it is I who did it. It is I who does it. Because I am the creator and the sustainer of life. To say he is the creator of the disabilities. And it is written here. He is the creator of the disabilities. So, our main theme is differently abled for the sanctity of life. Differently abled for the sanctity of life. And my first point has been coined as integration of abilities and disabilities. You know, we all have smartphones in our hands, and whenever we change to a new phone, we synchronize our phone numbers, contact numbers. We sync them. It is nothing but integration. The integration of the old contacts to the new phone. And during the process, the two phone books come together. Here, when we say the integration of abilities and disabilities, the abled people come close to the disabled, and the disabled people come close to the able people. They come close to each other and they synchronize. The disabled synchronize with the able, and the able synchronize with the disabled, thereby forming or resulting in an action. And thereby resulting in the enhancement of interpersonal relationships, interpersonal fellowships. If you read verse 15, what God says, let me read from 14. Then the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses, and he said, "What of your brother Aaron the Levite? I know that he can speak fluently. Even now he is coming out to meet you, and when he sees you, his heart will be glad. He shall speak to him, you shall speak to him, and put the words in his mouth, and I will be with your mouth and with his mouth, and will teach you what you shall do." Here what is happening was, God was trying to teach to Moses. The same God was trying to teach to Aaron. The same Aaron should or ought to teach to Moses, and the same Moses ought to teach to Aaron. So here the able and the disabled are integrated. God being the able, Moses at times being disabled, Aaron at times being able and at times being disabled. These three come together, synchronize, and enhances not only the fellowship, but comes up with a strong deed, and that is the redemption and restoration of Israelites. That's how the task was done. The task was accomplished by the disabled. Why I want to utter the word disabled is because I want to see the intensity of the word or the concept disability. In that context, let me use the word disabled for now. Otherwise, let us go with the word challenged, physically challenged. So my dear friends, so the task had been fulfilled by mouth sharing to the mouth and the other mouth sharing to the other mouth. And I heard some husband and wife, one being deaf and one being dumb, how they get along all through their life. One being blind and one being deaf, how they get along. Disabilities with their abilities synchronize in erupting of lifestyle. So dear friends, my second point shall be disabilities collect power of God in grace. Disabilities collect power of God in grace. Here we have another beautiful text as well as context. Here Paul's visions and revelations are portrayed in this second reading. Verses 7 onwards have a very significance. Let me read from 7, a very, very short and concise presentation. Even considering the exceptional character of revelations, therefore, to keep me from being too elated means excited, me from being too elated, a thorn was in my flesh. A thorn was given to me in my flesh. I don't know how we go about if there is a thorn in our own flesh. If there is a thorn under our foot, I don't know how to go about. Here comes the man of God with much spirituality and with much convictions of doctrines and with much convictions of theologies and with much practical behavior and teaching. This man Paul says, there's a thorn in my flesh. And what he says? 3 times I appealed to the Lord. Why did he appeal? Just asking God to remove the thorn. And what was God's answer? But he said to me, verse 9, my grace is sufficient for you. It's a very tormenting statement from God. That we are with a thorn in our flesh, and we are encircled and surrounded by problems. God says, my grace is sufficient. Is it not a tormenting statement from God? Which means that this thorn shall be with you. This thorn is going to be with you. This thorn will live with you. This thorn is your life. That's what it meant here. And you know, this pessimistic approach of God is never a pessimistic until we understand it optimistic. And this optimism is that my grace is sufficient for you. God's grace ought to be taken as optimism. And he adds, saying, for the power is made perfect in weakness. Of course, we all know that we are weak. But you know, this weakness is surrounded by God's strength. So now where is this pessimism? But the thorn is still available. But pessimism is wiped out with the existence of the thorn. So disabilities collect power of God in grace. There is disability, there is but disability that will collect God's power, that will attract God's power, that will imbibe God's power. In what? Not as a salary, not as a reward, but as a grace. Grace is a free offering. Grace is something offered free of cost. Reward is what we achieve by our hardships and by our labor. But here comes the grace of God, which is attracted by our own disabilities, by our own weakness. And this thorn is the cause of God's grace. And here he comes up with beautiful portrayal of the thorn. He says, to keep me from being too elated. That's the beauty of the thorn. In my own experiences, in my own life, I always use this phrase. To suppress me, to oppress me, God has put me a thorn in my flesh. But I shall live with it, and God's grace will also follow that thorn. You know, Paul, in his further explanation, he breaks his heart saying, whenever I am weak, then I am strong. When I am weak, then I am strong. It's a beautiful statement. So my dear friends, the third point comes from the gospel reading, and this has a very significant lesson even in the gospel reading. And this lesson may be attributed to doctors and health workers, because here a healing was performed by the angel of the Lord, and later on the healing was taken up by our Lord Jesus Christ. As he said, at Bethesda there were some invalids or physically challenged. There were the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. And out of all these, there was one particular man who was lying down there for 38 long years. 38 long years. And this history of the patient was known to Jesus Christ. In verse 6 it reads this way. When Jesus saw him lying there and he knew the history of the patient. Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had been there a long time, that is 38 years. He said to him, now Jesus speaks to him, knowing that he was lying down there for 38 years as a patient. See how Jesus deals the problem. Do you want to be made well? It's a question from a doctor. Here comes a beautiful question from a beautiful doctor. Do you want to be made well? Do you want to be cleansed? Do you want to be healed? Well, is this because a doctor, knowing the patient for 38 years, can never ask him, do you want to be healed? Jesus asks him because there is something associated in the question, and there is something associated within his own circle of the patient. Because the patient comes from the Jewish background, and he was there for 38 years lying down, and all along his life span lived thus far had his friends helping him time and again. You know, the other day I was in Vellore Hospital, and I was outside loitering on some work, and I came across certain leprosy patients, and I went to them and asked, "Do you want to be healed?" And they said, "No." "Pastor, how come you ask this question?" "But this is a wonderful question. We don't want to be healed," they said. And I was not surprised because I know the reason. If they are cured, they themselves knew that nobody will care for them. Nobody will care for them. If they are not cured, they have their own circle of patienthood that they are helped time and again by their own patient mates. And now if we are healed, we are now segregated. The healing segregates now. And also, when I was traveling to Chennai and I boarded my train, and my berth was the lower berth, and as I entered to take up my lower berth, I saw a physically challenged man sitting on my lower berth. And I asked him, "What is your berth?" And he said, "My berth is upper berth." Then I asked him, "If you don't mind, let me go top. You can sleep or lie down here in the lower berth." You know, to my astonishment, he fired at me. "You think that I cannot climb the top stair, top berth? Do you think I am incapable, unable to reach there with my inability?" And I said, "I am sorry." So my point is, there is something called the instinct within them. Whether or not to be healed, whether or not to be taken care of, there is something to be addressed to them. There is something to be taken from them in advance. So I have coined my point as heal or treat at their own will and at their own risk. Because it is a matter of their own sanctity. It is a matter of their own privacy. It's a matter of their own willingness. It's a matter of their own divinity. It's a matter of their own patienthood. So Jesus was very cautious, and he said, "Do you want to be healed?" And now he takes a positive note from that patient, and now he heals them. And that's the way of healing the patients without hurting their feelings that they are ill, that they are challenged, that they are disabled. And I believe that our doctors have a very big course on that. Counseling to the patients, treating patients mentally, the touch response of doctors heals patients. Now, he takes up this man for treatment, then he speaks to him saying, take it up and walk. And that's the style of Jesus in effect. So, at the cost of the willingness of the challenged, let us take up this task of attracting them. Let us take this task of respecting them. Let us take this task believing that this is a big sanctity. From the floor of the patienthood, from the floor of the physically challenged, my friends. And we ought to see that they are able differently. If they are unable to walk, they are able to think. If they are unable to speak, they are able to understand. They are differently abled. The differently ableness is attributed to them with a sanctity of life. That the differently disabledness brings to them holiness. So, dear friends, let us regard this sanctity that is attributed to them by God, by synchronizing the abilities and disabilities, and by accepting the power of God in our weaknesses, and by giving them freedom and willingness for them to be treated with dignity, my dear friends. So, these disabilities are differently abled. That is ought to be underlined, underscored this morning. That itself brings them sanctity of life. That itself brings them God's grace on them. So may God shower upon them His own grace and make them differently abled despite these disabilities. Amen. Let us pray. God, our heavenly doctor, our counselor, we beseech Thee, O Savior, to help us, to help the helpless, not uttering them that they are helpless, but uttering to them that they themselves are helpful. May we keep up their dignity, because You have attributed them the sanctity of life. You have attributed and given to them the differently ableness to them. And may we understand the differently ableness in them, and may we take up them for our respect and for our ministerial tasks. Oh God, may You elevate them in spirit and in healing, Lord. That the disabilities may be made abilities. Not only the differently disabilities, but the different abilities. Lord, bless them, heal them, to that extent and to the end. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.